It's almost become an annual ritual. Students protesting for the right to education and them being met with police brutality and violence. But this is what being broke really means. Poor students cannot afford to better themselves versus an education system that says they cannot give it away for free. But what no one is asking is government managing the little funds we have correctly? In 2015, Wits student 𝗀𝗵𝗶𝗴𝗶 was shot 13 times with rubber bullets. But it's 2021 and the fees must fall protests have continued as a symptom of the institutional failings of our government to fund its free education promise through the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, or NSFAS.
When the free education announcement was made by President Jacob Zuma, there was no indication of where the money was coming from.
𝗀𝗵𝗶𝗴𝗶, a former student activist, feels the government hasn't found a solution to that conundrum. So then, how does it feel for you personally when you see that the student protests are happening in 2021 for exactly the same reasons?
It's very frustrating and disillusioning. You're not seeing any real change in these systems. NSFAS was still being seen as part of the solution when in fact it was part of the problem.
NSFAS falls under the Department of Higher Education and Training and has existed since 1999, primarily offering student loans. But in 2015, it underwent a facelift almost overnight, and now it is 100% focused on giving bursaries. These NSFAS marketing videos explain what a student can now expect.
NSFAS covers your tuition, your accommodation, your transport, your food, including your books. Let us not forget the personal care allowances.
All a student needs in order to apply is a university acceptance and an annual household income less than 350,000 rand. Has that not helped students?
Fundamentally, we cannot say that NSFAS has become a competent institution that can administer the funds that have been put into it.
Over the past 6 years, NSFAS has been rocked by allegations of corruption and embezzlement of funds by employees. It was then placed under administration in 2018 and its board was dissolved, leading to several investigations. It was in February this year that NSFAS's dismal state of affairs became apparent when an Auditor General's report released to the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Higher Education showed that the scheme had a complete lack of internal controls. Corruption watcher's 𝗀𝗁𝗶𝗴𝗶 had a front row seat.
They're not been covering themselves in glory at all. It's quite a dysfunctional picture that emerges.
NSFAS has had 3 qualified audits in a row, with the last one literally being called the worst ever. This led to an astounding 7 billion rands worth of irregular expenditure coming to light, all because there were little to no checks and balances in place.
What irregular expenditure is it's when the bookkeeping isn't quite in order. So the process to authorize that use of funds wasn't done according to legislative prescripts. So it is serious, but it doesn't mean that it didn't all reach students. The Auditor General now has a new category called a material irregularity, and that is where the money has gone towards fraud and corruption. At this stage, they're still figuring that out. And it's quite clear that the internal controls were not up to scratch, that IT systems were not sufficient to prevent this fraud syndicates from, engaging in the corruption that they did.
Its maladministration made NSFAS a soft target for corrupt activities, leading to nearly 500,000 student records being irregular.
Another finding in the Auditor General's report is that only 40% of the 440,000 irregular records had been checked, so they didn't even know if the supposed student was even real.
The report says there were a number of ghost students. These are students who don't exist yet are still being paid. What's more, over half of the irregular student records haven't even been investigated yet. How prevalent are ghost students in the NSFAS system?
They don't give a number of ghost students, but they do mention that there's fraud syndicates and essentially money being paid to people who are not students. And for me, that really gets me, because that's the cost of corruption, where a genuine student that, you know, the kind of students that are writing to us saying, we need our allowance, we kind of desperate, please can you intervene in some way, could be getting funding.
The myriad of forensic investigations have cost taxpayers 7 million rand. On the plus side, they're helping root out the corruption at NSFAS, but they come at the cost of funding real students. There are those that use the students' plight for political mileage, and this makes us forget who should be held accountable. It perpetuates the mistrust of universities and a lack of understanding of what happened.
And then you have our Minister of Higher Education, Dr. 𝗶𝗿𝗶𝗴𝗶, who says that what's happening at universities is like a soap opera. Clearly, the leadership is not up to the task.
In December, a new board was appointed at NSFAS, including a new CEO. We approached Minister 𝗀𝗵𝗶𝘀, but were told NSFAS spokesperson 𝗀𝗁cie𝗿𝗆𝗆𝗆 would respond on government's behalf. So you've received 3 qualified audits, the latest being dubbed the worst ever.
The board and the CEO are working very hard to firstly support the institutions to ensure they help us to comply. Secondly is to make sure the IT system is fit for purpose.
To avoid potential corruption, NSFAS's new system now uses a student's South African ID to check that he or she actually exists and to verify the family's financial status. Another issue is that past student loans are not being repaid by the recipients, whether they've graduated or dropped out.
Before 2018 fee-free education, students understood that to be funded by NSFAS as a loan, you have to repay it back. But since 2018, everyone gets a bursary. What does that mean? It means that you would have students that will drop out without even worrying about that money. We use the money we recover from our debtors to actually pay for future students. So it's in the interest of a NSFAS beneficiary to pay forward their loan.
It may not sound sexy, but social justice can look a lot like simple administrative justice.
When you get the protest, it's the product of in this month and this month and this month and on this every single day, certain officials aren't showing up and doing the things that they need to be doing in their daily work to change that picture.
This is potentially a weak point in our system.
One of the greatest things that happened under the NSFAS administration was to unravel coordinated fraud and some elements of syndicates that involve NSFAS officials. So what we have done as NSFAS to counter that, we have opened a fraud line.
And the new board has referred a number of criminal complaints to the Special Investigating Unit. NSFAS suggests one reason the Auditor General's report found ghost students is because there is no check if a student has dropped out. People that are not even students are somehow still receiving NSFAS funds.
Should a student exit the system without following the proper exit processes, NSFAS will only pick them up in the subsequent year.
So there are some people who are receiving monies or who have received monies from NSFAS who are actually no longer students.
We don't pay ghost students, but we do pay, or we could be paying, for students who have bunked classes. Who have dropped out. Unfortunately, we cannot recover the allowances.
It's lost.
It's lost. However, we can recover tuition.
Over a third of South Africans are counted as youth, so money mismanaged that was meant to help them can profoundly hamper South Africa's future. NSFAS says it isn't in control of the money once it's dispersed, but now has better internal controls to manage the funds.
That's why there's always a delay in January. That's why students always say, I'm waiting for NSFAS, NSFAS has not paid. We can't pay until registration closes.
It's even more heartbreaking when you know that it is related to fraudulent activities or corruption or embezzlement or anything that is 100% preventable.
Yeah, the course of Someone's life and their ability to make a contribution can be altered when you don't get to complete your education. And imagine having that grabbed away from you.